Alright, now I am sure a lot of you guys are going to be very familiar with John Mayer's Trio rig. And if you aren't, I've done a video highlighting all the main gear components of the Trio. Go give that video a watch after you're done watching this one. But earlier on in the tour, a lot of the gear was incredibly different to what we saw and what would be kind of known as the main Trio rig. Now I have some shots that I'm going to be sharing with you guys in today's video, going over the pedals, the amps, as well as the guitars that was used very early on in the Trio tour. These shots are actually from the very third show of the entire tour, well before Try was ever recorded, much less released. So these are arguably, I think, the earliest shots of John Mayer's Trio rig that I at least have ever seen, and I'm sure that you guys will have ever seen either. So massive shout out to Joshua who posted these in our Facebook group. These are ones he took himself at the show that he went to. They're amazing, so we're going to get into all of these images, break down his gear. Let's start off with the pedals. So we'll start off the pedals talking about the wah pedal, and the wah that John used for the John Mayer Trio is a real McCoy Custom RMC2, just like this one here. And this is actually one of kind of the cooler discoveries that I figured out what wah pedal exactly he was using. We always knew it was an RMC wah, but which model was really hard to pinpoint, but I figured out that it's an RMC2, and I'll probably make a whole separate video on this subject. But John's wah pedal was a real McCoy Custom 2 with the knobs on the side of it, this exact model here. Next we have a Boss TU2 as well as a Keeley Katana. Both of these pedals would stay on John's pedal board for the entire Trio era. Of course, the Keeley Katana being the original version, the only one that existed at that time. However, when it comes to the drive section, we really start to see some differences, and clearly where John was experimenting in his sound before sticking with the pedal board that we know he used for majority of the Trio era. John used a full tone, full drive 2 MOSFET as well as a Keeley modded TS808. Now the full drive 2 MOSFET is obviously carried over kind of from the Heavier Things era. It's a pedal John used quite a lot in his very early days, and it's something he carried over into the start of the Trio era. Now the TS808, John has gone on record saying it's paint chip close to the original TS808. He says that the originals do have some mojo to them essentially, but the Keeley modded one is pretty much identical, and you wouldn't really be able to tell unless you had both of them sitting beside each other. That's essentially what John talked about with the TS808, but we know that he did move on from the Keeley modded version to the original version for the Trio pedal board. Next we have another pedal that I genuinely had no idea John had ever used, and it's a vintage Fox Tone Machine fuzz. Now these obviously are incredibly expensive. I haven't actually looked up how much they are on Reverb. Okay. Yeah, they're not cheap. They're not cheap at all. Now, this fuzz pedal, obviously, I'm going to assume was used in place of the full-tone 69 fuzz pedal that John stuck with for the rest of the Trio era, essentially, but it's kind of cool to know that he was experimenting with one of these vintage fuzzes before moving over to the full-tone one. On the pedal board, we also have a big box, old school version of the Electro Harmonix micro synthesizer. This is the pedal that famously got John that amazing sound during the second solo of Belief during Where the Light Is. I know that's a very frequently asked question. This is the pedal that he used during that era to get that sound, and it's really cool to see him using it during the earlier days of the Trio. Obviously, it didn't stick with the Trio era, but he came back to it for the Continuum era and used it in his rack system. If you guys want that sound for Belief and that amazing tone, the only thing I will say is that I've bought the reissue version of this pedal, the newer version, and I definitely was not happy with it personally, and I personally wouldn't recommend the new version of the synthesizer if you want that sound. Maybe I'll do another video diving into that sound for you guys, but just keep in mind, I personally can't really recommend you go out and buy the new version of that pedal. Now, when it comes to the delay section, the pedals that John was using at this time are the ones that he stuck with for the rest of the Trio era. But what is different and interesting to note here is that the signal chain is not. Now the T-Rex replica, this pedal here is actually first in the chain for the delays, and then followed by the Way Huge Octopus Mark I AP2 version, just like this one here. Now, I'd always just assumed it would be short delay into long delay. That's just kind of how you would do it. But here you can tell, because he's not using all Pete Cornish cables, you can actually tell that the T-Rex pedal is first, then going into the Octopus. Now this is making me question what we know of his signal chain back during the Trio era, because for pretty much the rest of the era, he was using all Pete Cornish cables, the really long ones, so it's really hard to tell the signal chain because, especially on the back of the board, none of the shots actually show the full cables. So I'm kind of starting to think that maybe this is actually the order that he stuck with during this era. Now, in reality, the T-Rex replica was really only used for some things missing as well as vultures, but the octopus would also have been used for vultures, so I don't know. That's going to be something I'm going to have to experiment, and maybe another video to go on with the delays of the trio. That might be another video coming up, so please, if you guys haven't at this point and you're still watching, please hit that subscribe button. I'm almost at 10,000 subscribers, and I'd love to hit it before the summer ends. And I think a video like this talking about the delays John used during the trio era and putting out some more trio content for you guys would be really awesome. So I'd greatly appreciate it if you subscribed, if you're liking this content and want to see more of it. That's the only thing I ask. Now, the last thing we have to discuss in terms of pedals is that there was a Boss RC30 loop station off to the side, and according to Joshua, this was only used during gravity. Now, with the pedals out of the way, let's move on to the rest of the rig. Now, John was using a vintage Fender Vibratone for those amazing Leslie sounds, and he also had a Victoria Reverberato, which of course was being used for gravity. Now let's get into the amplifiers here, and John was using two 2-Rocks and one Dumble. Now the first 2-Rock was a 2-Rock custom reverb signature. We know John's very familiar with this amplifier. These were used all throughout the trio as well as into Continuum, and these amplifiers were used as the foundation for his own signature amp. The other 2-Rock is a 2-Rock Sterling Signature. This is from the very small run that they did before the 2-Rock Silver Sterling Signature that they currently produce. This amplifier here obviously is their take on the Dumble Steel String Singer, and this amplifier was famously used during Where the Light Is in place of an actual Dumble Steel String Singer. So it's really cool to see John using this amplifier this early on, and this might be the earliest shot we have of John actually using the original Sterling Signature 2-Rock. And last but certainly not least, we have Dumble Overdrive Reverb number 59. This amplifier is very special to me just because out of all the performances in the trio era, if I went down and listed all of my favorites, the Dumble Overdrive Reverb is pretty much used in all of them. All of my favorite tones seem to have that amplifier in the rig. So I've always kind of had a special place for this amplifier just because I think it sounds fantastic when used in the context of this rig. Now, my friend Jesse actually used to own this amplifier, and he told me as well that it's one of the best amplifiers he's ever played, and that's coming from a guy who's owned multiple Dumbles and played a lot of other amazing gear. So if he says it sounds fantastic, well, I'm inclined to believe him. Both 2-Rocks sit on 2-Rock 212 cabinets, and the Dumble Overdrive Reverb sits on a Dumble 412 cabinet. Now, this is one of the few times you actually see John using this specific configuration of cabinets where he has 212s and then a 412. It's one of the only times you actually ever see him use a 412 just in general. Usually it's all 212s with a 112 mixed in here or there. So a really cool look at seeing John with a different cab combination as well. Alright, we've gone over the pedals and the amplifiers. Now let's finish off the video with showing some awesome shots of John and the guitars he was using that night. Now, start off with the Crossroads 335, and this is probably one of the earliest shots we have of John actually with this guitar. He was known as a Strat player up until this point, so I've been told it was not really a known thing that he'd use Gibsons. I mean, I was, 9 years old when the trio was happening, so I don't know firsthand, it's just what I've been told. Now, one guitar, however, that is quite a surprise to see him using during the trio era is the Black One. Of course, this guitar you wouldn't normally associate with being a surprise to see in John's hands, but during the trio era, he really did not use this guitar at all. He used it maybe for a handful of shows at best, honestly, and he had just gotten the guitar relatively soon to the start of the trio era, but the Black One never became his #1 guitar really until the Continuum era. When the recording of that album was taking place, that guitar really came into his own, and that's when he really developed that bond with that guitar, and it became his #1. That guitar is the sound of the Continuum album. But during the trio era, it was rarely seen, which I don't really know obviously the full story with that, but it's interesting to note that the Black One was a rare sight during those times. Moving on to another Stratocaster here, we have the Monterey Strat. This guitar is heavily associated, obviously, with Continuum era as well as the John Mayer Trio era. This guitar is one of my favorite guitars that John has ever used. I mean, Slow Dancing during Where the Light Is, Who Did You Think I Was during Where the Light Is, just iconic performances with this guitar. And this guitar really was one of the main guitars used during the trio era. Then we have the Gold Leaf Stratocaster. Of course, this was used for Vultures. This song and Vultures just go hand in hand, and it's still kind of weird to see Vultures played without this guitar on a different guitar like a Silver Sky. Obviously, it sounds great on it, but this guitar was just so iconic for Vultures, and just, it's the Vultures guitar. So, of course, you know, if you see the Gold Leaf Stratocaster, we know he played Vultures that night. We also see John using the original Charcoal Frost Metallic Stratocaster. This one was given to him in 2003 and built by master builder Dennis Galushka, and this is the Strat that he was using before he got the Charcoal Frost Metallic Strat built for him by John Cruz. So keep in mind, he has two of them. This is the earlier original one, and then he got one built for him by John Cruz later on. The last guitar that we have here is the Telestrat Hybrid built by Chris Fleming. This guitar was of course used for Something's Missing and was really the only song that John ever played on this specific guitar. And there you guys go. Massive, massive shout out again to Joshua for sharing these incredible images from the show that he took that night. It's just ridiculous to see the trio rig in such an early form and it to be so different compared to the one that we're used to from all the TV performances and all the really amazing shots we have during the trio era. This one just shows a completely different look at the gear he was using and experimenting with right before he kind of found what would become known as the trio rig. So again, Joshua, thank you so much for sharing these images with us and letting me make this video. This is one of my favorite videos I've made in a long time because going over amazing new shots of gear and learning new things is just why I do this. I love this kind of stuff. So this was awesome to do, you guys. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Again, if you guys enjoyed this video, please smash that like button. It greatly helps out the algorithm and helps out the channel if you did enjoy these shots and this video. As well, you guys, if you enjoyed this video and stuck with me till the very end, please hit subscribe. Try and hit 10K. Please hit subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it if you guys want to see more content from me. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
Anyway, go ahead and click the subscribe button if you like what you see.